Why do we drive a car that looks like this? Not because it's common transportation, it's because we're on a trip. When we punch the button and the door jumps up, we are definitely different. And we are acknowledged. We are envied.
It was Canada's car, so sexy, so audacious that it became the vehicle for the dreams of almost everyone it touched. Dreams promoted with consummate skill by the P.T. Burnham of the automobile world, Malcolm Bricklin.
I got letters from kids, from guys who owned the Bricklin, and they would write me, "Dear Mr. Bricklin, thank you so much for inventing this car. I never got laid before I had one." It was a big deal. There's a lot of people.
And it also catches the eye of one of Canada's most respected premiers. To Richard Hatfield, the car is a way to return New Brunswick to its glory days. Together, the premier and the promoter set out to build the Bricklin.
This whole concept would have appealed to Richard Hatfield as a way of putting New Brunswick on the map. And he knew that New Brunswick hungered for that.
In just 2 short turbocharged years, the dream crashes and burns. In the end, the Bricklin destroys lives, creates financial ruin, and becomes known scathingly as New Brunswick's car. Creating a car is a conjuring act. Creating it independently, a virtual mission impossible. Yet Malcolm Bricklin is one of the rare few with the confidence and flamboyance to attempt to defy history.
Malcolm Bricklin was a showman. Malcolm Bricklin was what Hollywood used to be. There's a lot of people in Detroit which are boring as hell. I gotta admit one thing, Malcolm was not boring.
Growing up in Philadelphia, then in Orlando, Florida, Malcolm learns the Bricklin credo. Whatever he does in life, the family comes first. And he grows up where everyone believes from the beginning that he's destined for great things. In 1958, Bricklin drops out of college to start Handyman, a chain of late-night hardware stores. His plan is simple: take the late-night gimmick and franchise. And he hires his family to help him run the business. Bricklin's first big sale is to William Quayle Walker. Walker invests $300,000 US in the Handyman chain and mortgages his family paint business to do it. It turns out to be a disastrous investment. In late 1964, franchise holders sue Bricklin for $2 million. Although the court finds against him, Handyman declares bankruptcy before the judgments can be paid. Despite this, Bricklin claims he sold Handyman to William Quayle Walker and his company, Dixie Paint and Varnish, for $1 million.
They offered me an amount of money that would give me $1 million after taxes, and since that's what I said I wanted, which is what I thought I wanted, I sold out.
Dixie Paint and Varnish Company never bought Handyman for any price, certainly not $1 million. And when Malcolm Bricklin disappeared one day from the Handyman stores, Dad was left with a debt of approximately $300,000 that he had to pay off. It was really a bad deal for my mother and father. Malcolm Bricklin disappeared with the money and Dad was left holding the bag.
William Quayle Walker Sr. is one of the first to be beguiled, then burnt by the fast-talking Bricklin, and he is not the last. When When Malcolm Bricklin once again surfaces, it's in a place no one expects, Tokyo. It's late in 1967, and Bricklin's here because he realizes before virtually anyone else the massive potential for cheap Japanese cars in the United States. He's come to Tokyo to sell his vision to a little-known car company called Subaru. For the last year, Bricklin's been selling Subaru scooters in the United States. Now he wants one of their cars, the Subaru 360.
I saw a car there that looked like a small Volkswagen that they said I could buy for $600, FOB Yokohama. I said I'd be very interested in bringing that car in the United States. And they, being polite, said, well, that's fine, but in 1968, this was now 1967, there's new federal laws that come into play, and if you give us $1.5 million so we can meet those laws, we'll give you the car.
Unwilling to take no for an answer, Bricklin heads straight to the source of those laws, Washington, D.C. Sitting in the offices of the National Highway Administration, reading the new regulations for cars, he discovers a loophole that will change his life and bring Subaru to the United States.
The first page said, these laws apply to all vehicles over 1,000 pounds curb weight. And I open up the brochure, and the brochure says 960 pounds.
The introduction of the Subaru 360 in the United States is a runaway success. Banks leap to provide Bricklin with money, and sales mount. Flush with cash, he builds a lavish office and splashes out on a private plane, a yacht, and a helicopter. But in early 1969, disaster strikes. The Subaru 360 is branded a death trap.
The front cover was a cover of the Subaru 360 that sold for $12.98 retail, the smallest car and the cheapest car in the United States. And next to it was the Cadillac. And it had a bumper to bumper. And based on that, they said it was the unsafest car in the world. And you're right. The smallest car is the unsafest car. Not even a question about it. And when somebody brought me the report, I said, well, what's the circulation? They said 500,000. So I said, so 500,000 people don't buy it. Who cares? Wrong.
But it wasn't just size. Everything from a weak body to a small engine makes the car dangerous, and sales plummet. The banks cut off the money, and within a year, Malcolm Bricklin is out of business again. But he's not empty-handed. Not only does he now have a taste for the car business, but Subaru buys him out with a package of stock, just the stake he needs to put his next plan into place, a plan to build his own car. For Atlantic Canada, 1972 is a harsh year. Unemployment is in the high teens, and governments from Newfoundland to Nova Scotia are desperately trying to create jobs. In New Brunswick, a new premier is in power, a premier unlike any the province has ever seen.
Hatfield really wanted to make a splash. He wanted to make a splash with something that said, we're going to break the mold in New Brunswick. We're going to go beyond fish, potatoes, and forestry.
The Premier is sympathetic.
Richard Hatfield came to power with the goal of changing New Brunswick's destiny. Ultimately, he would find the project to help him do that, a project with an unusual inspiration.
Having 3 boys at the time who were under 10, every Saturday we watched cartoons. And every Saturday morning there was a cartoon on, and it would start off with an electric car riding around quietly, and then the gull-wing doors would open electrically, and that 30-second spot of that thing always intrigued me. I always had to make sure I saw it.
In In Southern California, Dick Dean is known as the master of chops, a builder of fantasy cars for Hollywood. Perfect credentials for Malcolm Bricklin and his new sports car. When he meets Dean, Bricklin already has a drawing. This is the car he wants Dean to make.
I got blocks of urethane foam. I went ahead and started carving the car as close to the pictures I can do, and it was a very secret project. I mean, it really, you had to be really a good friend of Malcolm before he'd bring you back and let you see it. He had a little nervous feeling about somebody wanting to destroy his creation.
In just 90 days, the Gray Ghost, as it is dubbed, is done. To raise the money to turn his model into a prototype, he shoots this film of the car. And with Dean's help, he ships the Gray Ghost east to Philadelphia for a critical meeting with the First Pennsylvania Bank.
The instructions were that he would come out and, you know, I would open the hood, open the door, open the trunk. Then if he went like that, I drove it away as far as I could before it fell apart.
Thanks to the Gray Ghost, Bricklin raises close to $1 million. But when he takes the car to Detroit, engineers from the Big Three literally laugh at him. There isn't a single inch of the car that can be duplicated, and Bricklin discovers it's poorly designed to boot.
I said, well, you can't really build that car. Plus the surfaces are incorrect. It doesn't have feeling. A car has to have feeling to be, you look at a Corvette, it's got shape. What you have there looks like someone got a new belt sander for Christmas and developed the vehicle.
Herb Grasse is a young hotshot designer from Ford. Bricklin convinces him to come on board by selling the car as a designer's dream, a chance to create something from the ground up. Persuaded, Grasse begins to redesign the Gray Ghost, now dubbed the Red Car. But Bricklin gives him a deadline, 90 days to create a clay model and engineer the car, work that normally takes 3 years. Once again, the reason for the rush is money. To keep it flowing, Bricklin must convince the banks that his car is a winner.
Well, basically what happened is every other day was a dog and pony show. We had First Pennsy Bank coming through, and we had to do the typical dog and pony. So Malcolm says, make this thing look good. So we busted our butt to get that thing done. And we got it done, and the taillights didn't have pizzazz. So I was driving a Pantera at the time, so I ran out, got the taillights out of the Pantera, and put them in there, painted them clay colors. So that's why the Bricklin ended up with Pantera taillights in it.
The red car sets a pattern. Haste will plague the rest of the Bricklin project. But this is a part of the Bricklin style, and it will cost millions.
I absolutely was over my head. I had no idea what I was doing. I was definitely opening up a dark door and walking in.
With the red car finished, Bricklin begins questing around for a place to manufacture the vehicle and for someone to foot the bill. He finds both about as far from the car-making world of Detroit as he can get.
A friend of mine suggested New Brunswick. Of course, my problem was I knew of New Brunswick in Georgia, and I knew there was a New Brunswick in New Jersey, but I didn't know about the New Brunswick in Canada.
When Malcolm Bricklin arrives in New Brunswick with great hopes, he discovers that Fredericks is virtually shut down. The St. John River has burst its banks, and the province is in a state of emergency.
At the time he came in May, the legislature was flooded, many books were damaged that were in the basement. The Beaverbrook Hotel, which is where the Premier lived at the time, was closed down and he had to move out. And in the midst of this is when Malcolm Bricklin came in, flew into Fredericton to meet for the first time the Premier. And they had an informal meeting.
What Bricklin discovers is that the unconventional Hatfield is a perfect match. Not only does the Premier have a vision for New Brunswick, but he sees Bricklin's car project as the way to achieve it.
Premier Hatfield was quite a human being. He was a man that really cared about his province, and he saw the car as a way of getting high visibility for the province. And he knew that they needed to do something because New Brunswick was known for fishing. And that's not really where he wanted it to be in order to bring it into the 20th century.
To Hatfield, Malcolm Bricklin is exactly the person to help him rebuild New Brunswick. Flamboyant, confident, worldly. A man worth taking a risk on.
The most important thing is to make a gut determination, and that's the only way you can make it. You know, is this man who says he wants to come to your province and wants to invest and has this proposal, is he a con artist or is he really an entrepreneur? I made the decision that Malcolm Bricklin was an entrepreneur.
Hatfield was trendy. The car was trendy. Bricklin was trendy. It clicked.
In June, Richard Hatfield announces that New Brunswick will invest $6 million to manufacture the Bricklin. But the decision is rushed by a leak to the media. The province never finishes its assessment of the deal, and Malcolm Bricklin never mentions that the car still isn't ready for production.
At the A post, which would put
in Detroit, the engineers are still struggling with the design. The gull-wing doors won't open, and the acrylic body simply cracks. When Terry Tanner comes on board as head of manufacturing, he's shocked by the state of the car and the St. John factory where it'll be built.
When I finally arrived at the plant, I found a basic broom factory with a snow load roof, with 9 holes in the floor and a car wash conveyor. The conveyor was in the wrong location in the plant. It was unbelievable. That decision was made by people in management who couldn't spell car, had no concept of what they're doing. They didn't have any idea. And they were family.
Living to the Bricklin credo, Malcolm once again places his relatives in key positions. His mother heads the complaints department. His sister is the company's lawyer. But the real problem is his father, Albert.
Wherever he went, St. John or Minto, he would absolutely not allow anybody to make decisions, and he would make decisions over their heads. And of course, because he had direct connections with Malcolm, Malcolm always supported him. And that's why the executives kept leaving.
But while chaos reigns in his Canadian operations, Malcolm Bricklin is in Arizona. A few weeks after signing the deal with New Brunswick, he moves there to live out a lifelong dream.
I remember when I was a little kid, the thing I'd rather be, I wanted to be a policeman and I wanted to be a fireman, but I think the thing I really wanted to be was a cowboy.
So he rented an office in the highest building in Phoenix and redecorated it. He sat in a saddle and dressed in Western clothing and immediately became the model of a Western cowboy.
At the same time, he moves his family into a serviced casita run by the Hilton Hotel. He even hires a bodyguard to drive his Silver Wraith Rolls-Royce.
This was kind of a cross between Disneyland and Detroit. The guy had flair, and he worked it. He worked it really good.
But up in St. John, Bricklin, Canada is floundering. Production still hasn't begun, yet bills are flowing in for everything from engines to Bricklin's extensive travel expenses.
My strength was making sure the design was what I wanted and the sales. and then hiring people to run the facility. One of the problems we had is we had to take Detroit experts and bring them to New Brunswick. And it's a tough place to live. You know, it's not sunny a lot of the times. There's not a lot of places to go. Therefore, management didn't want to stay there and pay attention on a 24-hour basis like management should in a case like that. And I was out there 7 cars, and I was not in Canada all the time, you know, building a car.
Less than 4 months after signing the deal, the Bricklin is in trouble. But Hatfield knows it's too late to back out. New Brunswick's first $6 million is nearly spent, and the Premier's future is now firmly entwined with the car and its maker. From now on, the two men have the same goal: make the car whatever the cost. In June of 1974, a twin-engine plane carrying Richard Hatfield and a crate of fresh Atlantic salmon heads for New York City. Malcolm Bricklin is already here. For the American promoter and the Canadian Premier, this is a critical moment. Tomorrow, the Bricklin will be unveiled in front of the American media and 1,000 invited guests at the Four Seasons Hotel on Park Avenue. But already plans are going awry.
Now it is the night before. We're going to get 3 Bricklins and put them inside on the fountains in the Four Seasons. And the car is 1 inch too wide to get in through the doors or the glass. Premier Hatfield and myself are outside the Four Seasons. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. 1,000 people are going to show up.
So what we ended up doing is myself and Steve Astalis had to figure out a way. Plus, we had to pass $1 million Picasso tapestry at the top of the stairs and make a left-hand turn.
We made the decision to build a spit to attach the cars and revolve them and move the spit in the cars inside. And we had to have the spit built in New York City and it had to be in there by 6 o'clock in the morning.
So what we did is we rotated the car on like a rotisserie, put it outside, drained all the fluids out of it, ran it through the thing, pushing it, and making a left-hand turn by the tapestry. I mean, this makes Fear Factor look like a kid's program because we're, you know, one screw up and we're buying a big piece of artwork.
The New York opening is a massive success. Dealers come with their families, and Malcolm Bricklin makes a huge impression.
As he approached the podium to speak, you would have thought he's Jesus Christ. When he finished speaking, the crowd promoted him to God. Now that's how charismatic Malcolm Bricklin is. You have very highly successful dealers looking at an extremely nebulous forecast on a very strange car, and they're all grinning like fools when Malcolm Bricklin gets through.
And the press was so enormous that we canceled our $3 million advertising budget and had 40,000 back orders through dealers.
Riding the wave, Malcolm Bricklin rushes to open the production plant up in St. John.
We didn't just build a car, we built a magnificent car that will be acclaimed around the world, that we'll all be proud of, and me especially to be proud to have my name on the back of that car. Thank you, and thank you very much.
Bricklin has been and is an advertisement for New Brunswick. As such, it speaks well for our province. And because its success will be our success, we ought to speak well of the Bricklin.
Malcolm, come on, let's go for a drive.
Yet despite the theater of the day, New Brunswick's car still isn't ready for production. Few beside Hatfield and Bricklin realize that the car on display is handmade. In September of 1974, the first Bricklin finally rolls off the assembly line in St. John. In New Brunswick, the excitement is palpable.
I had people phoning me, trying to lobby to see if I could move them up on the list of people that were waiting to buy a Bricklin car. There were a lineup of people. There were hundreds waiting.
But production is still plagued with problems. Although the line is moving, the gull-wing doors and the body are still bleeding the company dry.
The doors themselves are the car. They are the sex of the car, they are the appeal of the car, and they are the grief of the car.
At the Minto plant just north of St. John, there's also a crisis. This is where the revolutionary acrylic body is being manufactured. But not only is it proving hard to make, no one can work out how to glue parts to it.
So they hired an expert in gluing epoxy glue systems from McMaster University in Hatfield, Ontario. And he went down to the plant, and when he asked Albert Bricklin, who was in charge, how they tested the parts to see if they were stuck, his answer was, well, you see that 7-pound hammer on the table over there? Well, when the part comes off the press, we hit it 3 times with a 7-pound hammer. If it doesn't fall apart, it's stuck. That was the extent of Bricklin's technology.
The result is dramatic losses. The first cars off the line cost $16,000 apiece, but are selling for just $5,000. And while New Brunswickers are awed by the look of the car, they don't realize that it is an engineering nightmare, riddled with faults. By the fall of 1974, Bricklin Canada has spent $15.4 million testing and designing the car, and produced just 100 vehicles. Once again, the company is on the edge of bankruptcy, but only Malcolm Bricklin and Richard Hatfield know this. Both are desperate for some good news. What they get instead is the Bricklin election.
Look around. St. John is no longer stalled in the threshold. We're on the move. Let's keep things rolling with the Hatfield government.
In October, Richard Hatfield calls a general election. But rather than run from the Bricklin, he makes it a central plank of his campaign. And New Brunswickers eat it up.
Oh, they loved it. They loved it. And who wouldn't have? You know, it looked great. The New Brunswickers at the time were not aware of the fact that the car had been engineered after Bricklin arrived. They weren't aware that the production process was a shambles, that it never really came together. But the prototype of the car and then the first cars off the assembly line looked great. They were sexy cars, and New Brunswick craved that, something that in fact that they were producing that in fact was that sexy.
For the Liberal opposition, led by Robert Higgins, it's a disaster. Even though they know the project has serious problems, nothing they throw at the Bricklin or at Richard Hatfield ever sticks. But Malcolm Bricklin knows the Liberals will shut him down if they win. But with the Premier's election hopes literally riding on the car, Bricklin realizes that Hatfield is vulnerable and demands more money, and the Premier gives it to him in secret. In early November, $1.5 million is funneled to Bricklin, Canada. Rent on the St. John plant hasn't been paid for 16 months, and Bricklin is about to be evicted. 2 days later, another $1 million payment is authorized.
It was a secret infusion. If not, the Bricklin would have failed during the election campaign. And the prize of winning the election was great enough that Richard Hatfield and his Conservatives were willing to deceive the public that much.
For Hatfield, banking on the Bricklin pays off as his Conservative Party is re-elected. But the secret loans turn out to be a mistake. When the payments are made public after the election, popular opinion begins to turn against the project.
There was a shift in mood, and I think it was just by virtue of the fact that people could see the amount of money the province of Brunswick was having to pump in, and virtually the production of the car was not producing the revenue stream to, in fact, bring the plant up to its optimum level. There were no other substantial investors. The province of New Brunswick was it.
Hatfield and Bricklin do the only thing they can, ride it out. By this point, they have no other choice.
He tied himself to the car, and the car tied himself to him. And we were together. And we were stuck together for both good and bad. And unfortunately, it was to the bad.
The FAA is closed. All of the
on great vehicles. The time to get down to your...
Despite the secret loan scandal, the new year of 1975 starts with a new loan, $8.5 million in financing for the Bricklin. But for the first time, support for the car is slipping. In the legislature, the Liberal opposition goes on the attack, their campaign fueled by a series of high-level leaks.
And I remember getting a brown envelope with more or less a rough sketch at how much money had been paid out and what had really gone into the car itself and so on, and what really was needed, and contacting the sender and the sender really, you know, sounding the alarm, saying, look, we all believed in it at first, but it's got out of hand and it's just not going to work.
Oh, the Bricklin. Is it just another red, so wait and see.
As more Liberal revelations make it into public, the Bricklin becomes the local equivalent of a Newfie joke. And a song by New Brunswicker Charlie Russell goes to number 17 on the Canadian charts.
Now here's this fellow Malcolm. He comes from the USA. He was playing with his geometric instruments one day. Folks said what he drew was just a little bit absurd. They wondered, why would anyone put wheels upon a bird?
But the public lampooning of the project is just part of a larger crisis. Complaints are now flooding in from dealers across the United States. Many of the Bricklin's engineering problems have not been solved.
Well, the first and most important major problem with the car was the doors. We did not have a system that worked like this. We had a system that took 8 seconds, produced 1,500 pounds of energy, would bend and destroy the doors, which exacerbated the acrylic problem, which meant that we were cracking acrylic. We discovered we couldn't fix acrylic. Most fun when you have a whole car with no way to fix any damage. We had in '74 a suspension problem. They forgot to get the right springs. So the springs allowed the car to be too low and it bottomed. Very hard on the people riding in the car. Then we have a car with no provisions for spare. No place to put it because it wasn't designed with a spare. We had an interesting situation in our hatches, still there on all the cars built because we can't get the water out. So where's the water go? It goes inside. The hatch seal was of a durometer. It was so soft the glass would fall in when it got hot. The console, interior-wise, was so weak that if you leaned on it, it would break. The most important thing is the buttons were far aft that you couldn't operate the doors except with your elbow.
In an attempt to save his own reputation, Bricklin and his American team blame the problems on the New Brunswick workers.
Now, if you have a work ethic, which is hunting moose, shooting salmon, etc., digging coal, cutting trees down, it's not a bad work ethic, but it is distinctly different. Americans go to the doctor when they can't go to work. They work until they drop. They haven't got a lick of sense. Europeans and Canadians, especially New Brunswickers, go to work when they have to, and they don't go because they want to.
With unemployment at record levels, workers in Atlantic Canada have a special deal. It's called 1042. Work for 10 weeks and you can claim unemployment insurance for up to 42. Bricklin workers find the scheme irresistible.
what was happening, I'm not sure it was ever reported, but we were getting turnover of about 80% every 90 days because you had a very liberal unemployment thing. You worked 90 days or 120 days and you got X amount of money. So whenever those days came, everybody quit and started taking unemployment.
When Bricklin's criticism reaches the premier, Hatfield sees it as a cheap shot. For the first time, a rift opens between the two men, a rift that will never close.
Malcolm Bricklin's comments about the workforce are, I think, unfair, and I personally resent them. For example, in St. John, New Brunswick, there's always been a very stable workforce. Shipbuilding has been a success. The Irvings are one of the leading industrialists in the world, and they've built their ships and built their oil plants on New Brunswick workforce.
In late summer, fed up with faulty cars, hundreds of dealers refuse to buy anymore. Bricklin immediately lays off 250 workers, and Richard Hatfield orders an audit of Bricklin, Canada by Clarkson Gordon. Meanwhile, Malcolm Bricklin tells Hatfield he needs another $10 million. But for the first time, the premier says no. He wants to wait for the audit. A few days later, it arrives on his Fredericton desk.
The Clarkson Gordon report came back after interviewing all the personnel, showing that the losses for Bricklin, Canada were at least 16 million and probably understated, another 6 to 7 million for the American companies and probably understated. There would be continuing losses of operation for the next year based on the best projections they could make, and that Bricklin could not continue to operate without at least another $10 million in advances in loans.
And then on the Wednesday, which is the date that the cabinet usually meets in New Brunswick, met and made a decision based on the report that they would not put any more capital into it.
That same day, Malcolm Bricklin is meeting with his board of directors of the Holiday Inn in St. John. He too has the Clarkson Gordon report.
We sat down to see what chances we had to go forward, and I think we all decided there was nothing we could do about the labor, and there was nothing we could do about the political situation, so it didn't matter how much money went in there, nothing was going to change anything.
That afternoon, as soon as the cabinet meeting ends, Richard Hatfield gets on a government helicopter and heads for St. John and the Bricklin meeting.
And landed outside the city, of course, with a car waiting for them, and went directly to the Holiday Inn, believing that they would avoid the press until after the meeting. When they arrived at the Holiday Inn, the press were already in the yard, and in order to get to the conference room on the lower level, they decided they would come down the back stairs and go through the kitchen. But unfortunately, the press were way ahead of them. They were waiting for them in the kitchen with microphones ready. And all that Hatfield could do was mumble and refuse to comment.
We sat down, and we were all realistic, and we were all sorry, but we all saw no other choice. And that was it.
Do you remember, did Hatfield say anything in particular, given he'd been so involved in the project?
You could tell he was extremely disappointed, but so was I. And he was, I think he felt really bad for us, you know, for what we had to go through, and for himself and what he had to go through. And he seemed to be extremely sad because he saw so close to being able to accomplish what he wanted to accomplish for the province being thrown away. And politically, he had no other choice.
How did you feel?
Disappointed.
Just disappointed?
Well, I think it was a deep disappointed.
As Malcolm Bricklin and Richard Hatfield emerge from the meeting, it's clear to everyone the Bricklin project is over.
All those who were present in the meeting came down to the main entrance of the hotel and shook hands for the press. And Malcolm Bricklin walked off to unlock his car, drive away, and as he walked to the car, he said to one of the press people who was standing there, "Well, that's too bad about New Brunswick. I guess I'll go to Ottawa and make Trudeau look good."
With the receivership of Bricklin, Canada, the entire Bricklin organization collapses. While 200 employees demand that the plants reopen, Malcolm Bricklin applies for personal bankruptcy. The First Pennsylvania Bank immediately takes control of Bricklin's U.S. and Canadian assets. In St. John, the plant is stripped and everything is sold. Bricklin, Canada has been in production for just 1 year and produced only 2,880 cars. Despite their $23 million investment, 4% of their total budget, New Brunswick is left with nothing. For Malcolm Bricklin, it's the end of a dream. For Richard Hatfield, it's the end of a car and everything it symbolizes. For New Brunswickers, the demise of Bricklin, Canada is both a massive embarrassment and a costly mistake.
All in all, it was a sting. It was a sting that that New Brunswickers were left holding, paying the bills.
Hatfield got conned in the sense that they didn't know what it was going to take to put this car together. They didn't know what it was going to take to build a production line in St. John that would actually manufacture the cars to produce the cash flow to make this a viable operation.
Yet despite the fiasco, New Brunswickers quickly forgive their premier because they too feel the Bricklin was worth the risk.
New Brunswickers really regret that it didn't happen, that they didn't churn out thousands of these things and put themselves on the map as the manufacturer of that sexy car.
Although Richard Hatfield goes on to win 2 more provincial elections, he never escapes the stigma of this failure. From now on, across Canada, every government-funded scheme that fails is scathingly dubbed another Bricklin. As for Malcolm Bricklin, today he's back in the saddle for one last shot in the car business. Many of his colleagues say he knows it's his last. This time, he's privatizing a car plant in Serbia and then importing their vehicles to America. But will the venture succeed, or will it be another Bricklin?
I think it'll be a great success because this time we have people with equal skills in equal parts of the business. So it will not be me overpowering it with promotion and sales. They know what to do with manufacturing. We're bringing people in there who know how to update it, who are the best in the world. So for the first time in my life, I am doing a project that is very clear. And it's, I gotta tell you, a lot of fun.
And the Bricklin itself? Today it's a collector's item, but it's never stopped evoking intense passion, nor creating dreams. On leaving Bricklin, Canada, Terry Tanner dedicated his life to the car. It's taken him 28 years, but he's finally ironed out all the bugs in the Bricklin.
It's very emotional to me. You know, I don't ever not get emotional about this. This car represents a very important part of my life, and it has a place in history, and that's something that brought me to the car originally And I guess that's what kept me doing it, is that history. You know, 30 years for history.
Just another red, so wait and see. We'll let the Yankees try it and hope to God they'll buy it. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Everybody's griping about how times are getting tough. There's shortages in oil and gas and all that sort of stuff. The MPs want to raise in pay, the natives want their land. Pierre can't walk on water, but he's getting oil from sand. You see, I'm from New Brunswick, where folks are very poor. The Premier, he's our leader, well, sometimes we're not too sure. He's convinced them up in Ottawa as to just how poor we are. But now I suppose they're wondering about this $1 million car.